Hello everyone, I'm Tomi Huhtanen, I'm Executive Director of the Martens Center, and today we have a guest, our thinking talk, Vladimir Milov, former Deputy Minister of Energy of Russia, opposition leader and research associate of the Martens Center. And we are going to discuss about Russia. Vladimir, welcome.
Hello Tomi, great to be at Martens Center back again.
Okay, Vladimir, let's go, because we have had many of these discussions already, so in a way, during the year, so in a way this is a continuation. But what is very specific on this week is, of course, that now the much-awaited budget for Russia for next year has appeared. The discussion has started, we have numbers on the table. Vladimir, what is the budget proposal telling us?
This is a very groundbreaking development, and I would advise all the Russia watchers to pay specific attention. It's actually the main Russian financial document, which also tells us a lot about Putin's thinking for years ahead. It's a 3-year budget from 2026 through 2028, and this is actually the first time since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
When government no longer pretends that we have to just wait 1 or 2 years for things to normalize, and then Russia will take off economically, come back to solid economic growth, will decouple from the West, develop import substitution. This is, for the first time in the past few years, this is an admission that significant budget deficits will continue to linger with no end in sight. They project the deficit around 1.5% GDP for the next 3 years. Usually they said it's going to be just one year and then we'll fiscally normalize the situation. No longer, and they are opting, they just recently promised no new tax increases for another 6 years. They're doing an increase of VAT from 20 to 22% since the 1st of January and other tax increases, which is also, they sending a very strong negative signal to the society, the business community, that things are not okay. Because they've just been promising a few months ago that there are no new tax increases in the observed period of time. We don't need that. So Russia is entering a period of 7 years of consecutive strong budget deficits. Last time we had it was in 92-99 in the 90s. During Putin's era, it was like deficit for 2-3 years maximum, and then the budget was normalized, but not anymore. Moreover, a problem is that there is very little hope for revival on the horizon because economy is rapidly cooling down. There is a negative projection of contraction of fixed investment next year. Okay. Central bank had reconsidered its trajectory of lowering the interest rate. They're now saying we're taking a pause, we're going to keep it high to see if the inflation comes down in 2026. So the big question is where the hope is coming from, and the mood in Moscow in this regard is becoming increasingly grim.
Yeah. What role do sanctions play? Because there's always, of course, in Western Europe, is discussion about that.
Significant role. I always advise to treat sanctions not as people like looking for this one magic button which will switch off Putin once and for all. But to me, sanctions look more like a building consisting of bricks, supporting structures, and so on, which was erected for years, and finally it's delivering fruit. So sanctions diminished Russia's revenue. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the share of oil and gas revenues in the budget was 40 to 50%.
Yeah.
It's between 20-25% now. So oil and gas revenues diminished significantly. At the same time, because Russia decoupled and the import substitution, the pivot to China is more expensive, plus the military expenditure. Revenues are down, expenses are up. This is what generates the deficit. More tax pressure on the Russian economy to fill up this deficit gap. Faster economic contraction, what we see exactly this year. Putin loves to boast about 4% GDP growth last year. It's down to 0 in the third quarter of this year. Very rapid contraction of growth. Everybody discusses that Russia is on the brink of recession. We might see it in the fourth quarter. Economic cooling means less tax revenue, more problems for the budget. Inflation is also, Russian persistent inflation is also a product of sanctions. Russian central bank correctly explains it as a result of what they call a positive output gap. Yeah. Meaning that they keep injecting all this budget money into the military sector, into import substitution, but the output is not picking up because it's being constrained by sanctions, lack of access to technology, and so on. As a response to inflation, they keep prohibitively high interest rates, which is yet another growth killer. So on many fronts, revenue, additional expenditure, inflation, high interest rates, sanctions are having a big impact, so I think this should be an encouraging factor for the West to double down.
One big asset which Russia has had is its foreign currency reserves, and the discussion was always when that's going to run out. And now, if I have understood correctly, the estimation is between now and let's say early next year, spring, summer, that's going to be over. So no anymore. Foreign currency reserves, and then the question how they're going to handle it, and do they ease monetary policy? So how do you see that? Is that the final frontier, and what will the central bank do to compensate the situation?
The finance minister Anton Siluanov had basically admitted in these discussions on the new budget and the State Duma, which is also openly available, and I will be publishing more direct quotes from him. He said, consider the liquidity part of the National Wealth Fund already expired, which is currency plus gold. That's the so-called liquidity.
Really expired?
About $50 billion still left, but the projected budgetary deficit for the rest of this year is about $60 billion.
Okay, so it's
the
by
cash,
Christmas we are done.
Yeah. The cash in stash is less than the projected deficit for the remaining months of this year.
Okay, but you would assume that has a big implications. No?
Yeah, that has big implications, which is why the VAT increase and all these unpleasant, fiscal measures. How the government is going to solve that?
Yes.
This is they already done it in 2022 and 2024. What they do is basically printing the money, but it's well hidden behind this complicated repo auction scheme.
Yes.
Central bank issues some extra money for the banks through repo auctions, which the banks then use to buy government bonds.
Yes.
So essentially, central bank credit to the government, which is monetary emission. A Russian central bank officially complains that they haven't seen such a strong increase in money supply in 25 years. As per the recent interview of their head of the monetary policy department, Andrei Gangan, the monetary mass, M2, increased twofold since February 2022 in 3.5 years. Which is the result of this fiscal expansion and the budget stimulus to the economy. We see more of that, which means that all these hopes of taming inflation, they are doomed.
Yeah.
Which is why recently at the press conference at end October, the central bank governor, Nabiullina, she said that we're reconsidering our forecast for inflation and average interest rate for 2026, so they worsen the forecast. They say we're not going to reach 4% target, and we are reconsidering upwards the estimated interest rate corridor from 13 to 15%. Yeah. That's the average central bank rate that they expect next year. While the businesses say that unless key interest rate will not fall to at least 12 or lower, there will be no revival of economic activity. Which means that, according to central bank figures, we already have no revival projection for next year. So it raises a big question with economy quickly falling into the recession and reserves expired. How does Putin manage this situation remains an open question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Vladimir, you mentioned already China, and of course the public narrative is that Russia is able to continue its war because of China increasingly. And increasingly, the impression is that increasingly China has had to increase its support, but there is a trade-off. So how in big picture, how do you, and you're writing actually, Martes, a more detailed paper on it, and we are going to soon publish it, but how does that relation look like economically? Is it so helpful, and what's the price for Russia?
Russia-China economic relations is complicated, so I would advise against going into oversimplifying narratives. Chinese government is interested in providing some support to Putin's regime. Let me be absolutely frank. Putin's government is the most pro-Chinese government ever in the Russian history, and probably will never see anything like that again.
Yeah.
So folks in Beijing, of course, they're interested in providing some support, but they are in a complicated economic situation themselves. They have ailing economy. And for instance, they never allowed, not even today, after the visits of Putin, Prime Minister Mishustin, very recently Finance Minister Siluanov was in Beijing, but they're not allowing Russian government to place government bonds at the Chinese financial market.
Yes, yes.
So you probably saw some headlines lately. Russia will be issuing yuan-denominated bonds domestically at the Moscow Stock Exchange to soak in liquidity of the Russian exporters who trade with China and accumulate yuan in their Russian bank accounts. That is it. China is not allowing them onto their financial market because they want to keep all the capital inside. They need it, right? The second thing is that this big expansion of trade that happened since the full-scale invasion did hurt some of the industry sectors, which means that China is introducing some restrictive measures, like they introduced import tariffs for Russian coal. As a result, Russian coal industry is collapsing, even as we speak, significantly because of the Chinese tariffs. Russia's main agricultural export, winter wheat, we export it all over the world, but it's banned in China.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
China imports grain from Ukraine, from Kazakhstan, but not from Russia. And then so Russian steel-making industry is in decline because it cannot compete with Chinese steel that is flooding the global markets. Russia is introducing, well, not exactly import tariffs, but they call it recycling fees against Chinese cars because they outcompete Russian car makers and so on. So beneath the surface, it's complicated. Bottom line, China is providing some support to Putin, but it's not going all in with a lot of resources to stabilize Russian economy. It's not. It doesn't want to be like IMF in the 90s for Russia, right? Some, as I would call it, life support to make sure that Putin's regime does not collapse and does not lose on the battlefield, but not going all in, not providing Putin with resources he needs to stabilize the situation. So it's like a sort of a half measure, which is really not saving Putin's economic situation.
There's a little bit aside. There is the Russia and China have history. Also, some region in East Siberia. In fact, they are all Chinese regions. So there are many historians who claim that at a certain moment, especially having the situation that there are not many Russians in Eastern Siberia, and there's a lot of Chinese, and then combine the fact that maybe in a certain moment in history, Russia will be so weak that China would have temptation to test and take back the regions even, or something like that. But I guess if that would happen, that would wait. Or you think that that's really is that the concern of Russians or Putin's administration, or is it just an urban legend, so to say?
It's not an urban legend because, like, if you visit China, if you listen to what the experts, the think tanks, the pro-government media, if there's any other media in China available, right? If what they're saying, they do say. It's a very popular narrative in China that these Eastern Siberian and Far Eastern lands were taken by Russia in an unfair manner. So effectively, this is ours. But let's be frank, this is not a prospect of today or near future. However, generally, most of the Russian society, Russian elite, no matter how hard Putin tries, they still take China with great concern, as like a bigger power with some very pragmatic, selfish interests, which are essentially different than ours. And at some point, I mean, if we put ourselves in a totally dependent position, at some point in the future, again, not now, not in the near future, but at some point they will claim something from us, right? So this narrative is very popular. However, I have to say, what I see is that Putin plus just a handful of top decision makers in the National Security Council, they are like extremely pro-Chinese. they believe that Russia needs to go into like full-scale brotherhood and whatever kind of unions with China. But this is just a small layer. If you go further, the big business, the oligarchy, many members of a ruling elite, they are far more cautious. So it's Putin's game to bring Russia closer to China, which is, I don't see it being shared by many people, even inside the ruling class.
Okay, thanks, Vladimir. Now we go to the last question, but it's a big one, which is what will happen in the future. So there's two narratives now, also among the expert community here. Is let's assume that upcoming year will be very, very difficult for Russia. Economically, also militarily, they are not going to move forward. As you described, economic situation is going to go worse. So then the question is, what will happen next? And there's big school of thought who thinks that, what the Russians will finally do, that they make some kind of ceasefire, and then they start to prepare for 2-3, at the same time they try to, Ukraine will go to elections, they try to do Moldovan style intervention, and then Russia, will prepare for the, next conflict with the West, all the time having some, hybrid warfare going on. The other school of thought is with the argument that Putin cannot afford peace. That the whole economic aid, the whole economic model is now economic model, is based on war. If there would be ceasefire, there would be a risk that some kind of, there would be expectations among the population that what will happen next? The conditions will improve, but most likely not, because the economic fundamentals have, as you described, have now changed. And the third is the risk of taking, you have 700,000-800,000 traumatized men with a lower threshold for violence and a lot of resilience for all kind of threats, and you take that population back to Russia and try to integrate that could create problems. And as a result, Putin would just try to escalate the situation quite quickly with the NATO and with West and see the opportunity, because in reality, if you look at the Western, then European NATO, they are, at least in many terms, they are not ready, prepared for full-scale war. Whether or not Russia is, that's another question. So which of these two scenarios, A, kind of ceasefire deal and preparing to continue the conflict in a couple of years, or B, would Putin escalate directly? What do you think? Or is there something between?
Russian decision-making community is at a vital crossroads at the moment, because what happens, we're sitting here in November after what was so-called Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine, which is the big deal. A lot of people in the Russian elite are discussing the outcome and the results of that. So what happened is Russia tried the major offensive, which ended up with very little territorial advances, huge losses. Consider like 100,000 dead just during this, maybe a little more, but in that range. We have about 50,000 only confirmed death with obituaries. We know the names of the people. That means closer to 100,000 actual dead. Resources dwindling. Also, another topic deserves separate discussion, but military industry is under huge stress. Financially, September was the first month when arms and weapons and ammunition production declined year on year, for the first time since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So it reached its peak and it's in a huge financial difficulty. Plus, there is a huge shortage of manpower. And people like to say that Russia has 140 million population. That's a significant, elderly and women population. Males aged from 20 to 40, only less than 14% of the overall population. 20 million. Plus, about half of that is either already serving somewhere, military, security, military industries, or sick to the extent that they cannot, like they have problems with eyesight or handicapped or something. They cannot serve physically, or outside of the country. And the remaining, 10 million of men aged from 20 to 40 are working in vital industries. Which are, if you read all the language that Russian business community is sending to the Kremlin about the potential future mobilization and so on, they say, don't do it. It will be disastrous for the labor market. The sectors which are the main donors of men for fight, agriculture, logistics, manufacturing industries, and utilities, communal services, they are already like totally exhausted. They don't have the manpower. No more donors. So like and this huge extent of losses. So the question here, we approach next spring, 2026, April. Snow will melt. What do? Try this big offensive again?
Yes.
With so many losses, so little gains, under such huge financial stress, makes no sense. Putin did not yet come to terms that he's kind of constrained. He still thinks that he can't do it again and continue this indefinitely. What is essential is that we, the free world, Ukraine, the West, brings him back to reality. With more battlefield pressure, sanctions pressure, whatever we can. Because his own people, and I will soon publish a report based on direct quotes of what they say during this State Duma deliberations on budget, whatever. We're out of money, the reserves are expired, we don't have any more manpower, labor shortage is extreme. I need to put that on paper. It's pretty remarkable. They will basically need to put these thoughts in his head, like he doesn't have resources anymore for a full-scale offensive. So one of the scenarios, he might scale back and resort to a sort of a terror war. Bombardments, drones, he can do that. There are still resources for that. Limited scale pinpoint offensives at the few points across the 1,000-mile front line. He can do that for some prolonged period of time. Yes, you're right. The challenges of a ceasefire are great. Not only because all these war-trained people coming back. That's one thing. The other thing, questions will mount in the society. What was that? I mean, what was all that? Because if you look at the loss and pain that Russia is suffering, and if you look at whatever can be hypothetically presented as gain, the balance is not in Putin's favor. And right now, he literally shuts down all this debate by saying, listen, it's no time for that. We're at war. But if we're not at war anymore, questions will mount like what all this was for, He doesn't want that, which is why I think the realistic pattern is that he probably will scale down operations, no major offensives anymore, switching more to this terror-style war. But again, you see that the fatigue from the war in the society, the business community is very, very strong. So already now people are asking questions, this summer offensive, what was that for? Next year that will be even stronger, regardless of the scenarios. We need to increase this pressure because I think it's pretty evident now that it's working and producing some cracks, which was the ultimate result.
I think that's a good conclusion. So thank you very much, Vladimir. It was very, very interesting. And thank you for following and coming back to our future thinking discussions and debates. And of course, follow our activities and our publication, our research in our Martens Center website.